If you want huge arms, you need to make sure you're hammering your triceps. Don't get me wrong, biceps with a huge peak look great for aesthetics, but triceps make up 2/3 of your upper arm. So if you want massive arms that stretch your sleeves, you better be focusing on triceps. When I first started trying to bring my arms up, I understood the importance of dedicating time to tricep work, but the exercises and how I approached my training, they weren't ideal. I made some typical newbie gains early on, but now having developed my arms to just under 20 inches fully pumped, I can tell you that most things I was doing early on, they definitely held me back long term. And in reality, I spent years accomplishing what I could have accomplished in months, especially had I known then what I know now. But at the time, I was taking things that I saw a lot of guys doing in the gym, and also the things I was reading in magazines, and I was putting them to work in my own training, and to my frustration, I just wasn't getting results. And today, I'm gonna cover everything I did wrong training triceps over the years, so that hopefully you guys can shorten the amount of time it takes for you to reach your goals. So learn from my mistakes, implement what works, and shorten the amount of time it takes for you to get to your goal. So let's start with the first thing that was a huge mistake, in no particular order. Number one was focusing on the wrong exercises and the wrong technique. When I first started training in 2003, there was one word associated with tricep training. That was squeeze. Any exercise you did for triceps, the goal was to squeeze the triceps as hard as possible. Now, according to that logic, if a particular exercise made you feel your triceps squeezing better, that would mean it's a better exercise for tricep growth. Now, that led to a lot of guys promoting exercises like a tricep press down with a rope, but with an overemphasis of really pulling that rope apart at the bottom. Now, I did this religiously for years, and you know what? I never really got any great pumps. My arms never got bigger from them. And although my triceps did get tired from training them this way, I wasn't really able to handle much weight at all. I didn't feel strong in any position on this exercise, and I just didn't feel any tension on the triceps. Fatigue? Yes, I felt plenty of that, but not tension. And we know today that mechanical tension is the target when our focus is training for hypertrophy. But even back then, I knew there was a better way to do it. So I said, screw it. I'm gonna do what I think feels right. So I swapped out the rope, which, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad attachment, but I used one that was a bit more stable, one that was a bit more comfortable, and one that I could definitely load the triceps up with more weight. And of course, as a result, place more tension on the target muscle, pain-free. And for me personally, that ended up being the V-bar. But remember, the handle is just a tool. The technique of the lift is gonna be the game changer. I then loaded up more weight. I shifted from textbook form of being a bit more upright. I started performing them with a bit more forward lean of the torso, and that allowed me to handle more weight, stabilize my body better, and as a result, place more mechanical tension on the triceps. By now, not just extending my arms down, but using almost a pressing motion, or better yet, a throwing motion in my tricep extension. And due to how stable my body is on this movement, I'm able to handle heavier loads. And as a result, expose my triceps to a greater stimulus. And when I do these, I'm not thinking anything about squeezing anything on this movement. All I'm thinking about here is tension on the triceps. Back then, the theory was all about squeeze. In my opinion, today's version of the squeeze back then is now optimal. Guys will say the best exercise to train a muscle is one that puts it in an optimal position. But I'll tell you what, the only thing optimal you guys need to know about tricep training is take the exercise you feel a good contraction with and find a way to position yourself so that you can create the greatest amount of tension on the target muscle with that exercise. Now, any exercise you perform is now an optimal movement. Number two, I wasn't focused on getting my triceps stronger early on. Most people associate strength with compound lifts. And most people follow the idea that as long as you're getting your pressing in and hitting those compound lifts, that then all you need to do for triceps at the end of your training is a couple isolation exercises, just to make sure that the triceps are targeted directly. But to be honest, that never made much sense to me. A guy who has massive legs is probably a guy who could also squat 400 or 500 pounds. A guy with super thick erectors and massive traps, that's also a guy who could probably deadlift and row a massive amount of weight. So it never made much sense to me that a guy with massive 20+ inch arms is someone who's probably just doing a few pump sets at the end of his training. And when that logic clicked for me, I started treating my arm training with a similar focus as I do any other major muscle group. If I was then curling the 30-pound dumbbells, I knew I had to get those up to the 50, 60, or even 70-pound dumbbells with the same technique. And if I did that, certainly my biceps would grow. If I was doing skull crushers with, let's say, 50 pounds, I knew my triceps would be bigger if I got that up to 100 or 150 pounds. And this made me very hyper-focused on exercises that are very well suited for long-term progression. In addition to something like a V-bar press down, down, which could easily be overloaded. Easy bar skull crushers and overhead dumbbell tricep extensions, those were my bread and butter. And I went from performing 40 to 50 pound overhead extensions to over 150 pound overhead extensions. And I went from close grip benching early on with 95 to 135 pounds for reps to hitting my strongest close grip bench press of 385 pounds at 195 pounds body weight. And I attribute a lot of my tricep development to just how strong they actually are. And while strength is not necessarily the driver of hypertrophy, one major fact that people overlook is in fact the crossover effect. Most people today are so blinded by what they read online that they completely lose the ability to think logically. Yes, heavy weights are definitely not needed to stimulate muscle growth. However, if you get your triceps brutally strong with low rep, high weight training, and as a result of that newfound strength, you can now place more tension on the target muscle, the triceps, on even isolation exercises. The end result, a greater stimulus for muscle growth as a whole. The bottom line, muscle growth and training a specific body part does not exist in a vacuum. You're not growing your triceps just from the 1 to 2 exercises you train in the 8 to 12 rep range. You're growing your triceps as a result of the pressing you're doing on your compound lifts, the pressing that you're doing on your compound shoulder exercises, the volume, the frequency, and intensity of your isolation movements, and your strength that you develop from your compound lifts that transfer over to your isolation exercises. And the bottom line is, if you want massive triceps, don't just pick one thing to target. Take advantage of every opportunity for growth, and understand that they're all interconnected, and milk every single one of those for growth. And if you do all those things, you're gonna have some massive arms as a result. And if you want the exact programs that I recommend to build more muscle, using proven old school bodybuilding methods, all my old school mass gain programs are down below. And as always, if you wanna see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.